Hello, class. We're now moving away from the unit on business entities. However, we're going to continue to look at a business relationship. It's called agency. And there are two chapters on the law of agency, chapters 32 and 33. In chapter 32, we're going to focus on what the agency relationship is, how it is formed, and what are the duties owed between the two parties. Later, when we look at chapter 33, we'll focus on the liabilities that are associated with an agency relationship. I'm going to switch out now to get the PowerPoint up here on the screen. Let me set this to slide view. Hope this will work out. All right. Here we go. So let's start with a definition of an agency. Oh, sorry, class, this is part 1. So we're just going to look at agency in general, and then we'll take a look at a couple of employment relationships. All right. So let's start with the definition of agency. First of all, agency is described as a fiduciary relationship between the two parties, the principal and the agent. Remember the word fiduciary? That's a term we used earlier in the semester in the areas of partnership and corporation. Whenever you have someone acting on behalf of another, there is a fiduciary relationship. Here, the agent will act on behalf of the principal. That is the fiduciary relationship. So the two parties, they are the principal and the agent. The principal hires the agent to represent the principal's interests, to act on behalf of the principal. The agent agrees to such representation and also agrees to follow the principal's instructions. Now, why would a principal want this type of relationship? Why agree to have an agent represent him or her? Well, one reason the agent would be hired by the principal would be to help the principal cover more ground, increase his or her business opportunities, expand the reach that the principal has. Another reason, the agency would give the principal a level of expertise. For example, and this is very common in an example, right? When someone buys or sells a house, typically the owner or the buyer is going to use a real estate broker, someone with knowledge of the market, someone with experience in sales transactions, someone who has contacts and knows how to negotiate a deal. All right, so that's a very typical example of an agency. We're going to turn our attention right now to employment and take a look at a couple of these employment relationships in the context of agency. So first we have the employer-employee relationship, right? Who are the two parties involved here? Well, you have the employer who has hired the employee. You have the employee who works for and is paid by the employer. Right? The employer is going to remain in control of the working conditions and where the work is going to be done, when the work is going to be done, even how the work will be done. The employer will also take responsibility for the employee's work. And should the employee do something wrong or omit to do something, fail to do something, the employer is responsible, will be liable for any loss that occurs as a result of an action, as long as such action or omission was within the scope of employment. So generally speaking, when the relationship is described as employer-employee, there is an agency. Right. we're going to now take a look at a second employment relationship, and this is called the independent contractor. Don't let the use of the word employment confuse you here. I try to adjust for that, and I'll try to use the phrase working relationship, but sometimes it just comes out employment relationship. All right, so in this second working relationship, the worker is called an independent contractor. The independent contractor also works for and is paid by the employer, all right? But the employer in this situation will have limited control. The employer is not going to set the working conditions or dictate when the work will be done or how the work will be done. And so the employer generally will not be held liable for the acts or the omissions of the independent contractor. Right? It's possible that there can be an agency relationship, but there's not necessarily an agency relationship. They could actually still have this working relationship without an agency. Right? It's up to the facts. The facts will help us determine whether there will be any agency relationship. All right. Now, how do you tell the difference between an employee or an independent contractor? This ability to tell the difference is quite important. All right. The workers' classification has legal consequences. And not only should the employer be concerned, but the IRS is going to be concerned too, because the workers' classification, whether as an employee or independent contractor, it will determine who pays the payroll taxes, who pays the withholdings, or should the employer be paying withholdings. All right. So workers and employers, they are both concerned about this classification too. All right. It is related to benefits. You realize, and I think because this area we often have a lot of knowledge about because it affects our daily lives. What you are paid and what kind of benefits you receive are tied to your status as an employee or as an independent contractor. So benefits such as an unemployment insurance or health insurance, they only are given, generally speaking, to employees. So one of the key factors used by the courts and the IRS to determine whether a worker is under the control of an employer, that is the factor that the IRS thinks is key. All right, and so the court follows suit. They're going to take a look not only at that, what level of control does the employer exercise over the worker, but they're going to take a look at what kind of work is being done. Is it distinct from the employer's, or is it very, very similar to what the employer does? And so, for example, I'm a homeowner, and if I need repairs, I will go out and I will, interview or talk to a number of different tradespeople, right? And I will hire one to do the repair work on my house, all right? That repair person, though, is going to be an independent contractor, right? Their work, whatever they do for me, is separate from what I do, all right? I have no expertise and really have no way to dictate or tell them, how to do the work. Also, the scheduling of the work, they tell me usually, the repair person, when they can come, and if it fits into my schedule, I try very hard to be available when they can do the work. So I'm not saying that they must come and they must work 6 hours a day or whatever it is to finish the project. All right. So very clear then that that relationship, that's an independent contractor relationship. Now, as I said earlier, you're probably somewhat and maybe even very familiar, all right, with this topic. And what's happened, interestingly enough, is that in the last several years, the gig economy has grown, right? We work differently than we have in decades past. And in this last year, the issue has become even more pronounced. Okay, not so much before the pandemic, the year before that, it's become even more pronounced, and particularly in the rideshare industry. You may have followed this, right? The issue has really heated up over Lyft and Uber, right? So the California legislature late last year, they passed a measure that made rideshare drivers employees of their companies with all that that entails, right? And, well, understandably, the rideshare companies have really pushed back at that, right? They have threatened that they will close their businesses down in the state like California. And what they have done most recently, and what we will have a chance to take a look at this fall on the ballot, is a measure. There's a measure on the ballot this November to change that classification, the way California wants to classify these rideshare drivers. We're going to vote on this, all right? We're going to have some say as the electorate whether or not that should be permitted, all right? So I've asked you to discuss this type of issue, employee versus independent contractor, on the discussion board, and look forward, to reading some of your thoughts and to hearing some of your conversations online. All right, so think about that and be prepared to share your thoughts. All right. Now let me move on, and we'll just finish up this part, and also look at a problem to just help us illustrate the issues. Right. So what else do courts look at when they're trying to determine whether a worker is an employee or an independent contractor? Well, the court may take a look at who owns the tools or who buys the supplies for the project. If the worker brings their own tools and brings in the supplies, he or she is probably an independent contractor, right? The courts will look at how long does the job going to go on, or how long will it take. If it's a short-term assignment, if it's a discrete project, that's going to have a very definite beginning and end. It's not just some ongoing work that this person is going to do, then we more than likely have an independent contractor. The courts will look at how the worker gets paid, right? Are they going to get paid by the project for that one project? Or again, is it more a salary? And if it's by the project, then again, it looks a lot more, it is an independent contractor, all right? Right, so all of these criteria are looked at, in combination, but one of the strongest and most important criteria is who is in control, right? Which party is in control. All right, we're going to take a look now at a problem from your text. All right, it is business scenario problem 32-3, and I'm going to go out to your text. I think it's better, even though I know I've typed it here. All right, let me change screens. All right, all right, here we go. This is in your textbook. It is problem 32-3. Look at the end of the chapter if you care to see it in your own book. All right. So I'll read this to you. Stephen Hemmerling was a driver for the Happy Cab company. Hemmerling paid certain fixed expenses and followed various rules relating to the use of the cab, the hours that could be worked, and the solicitation of fares, among other things. Rates were set by the state. Happy Cab did not withhold taxes from Hemmerling's pay. While driving the cab, Hemmerling was injured in an accident and filed a claim for workers' compensation benefits in a state court. Such benefits are not available to independent contractors. On what basis might the court hold that Hemmerling was an employee? Explain. Right. What do you see here? What do you see that helps you determine that Hemmerling is an employee? And this is what we're going to go after that idea, because that's how the question is set up. All right. What supports a conclusion that Hemmerling is an employee? All right. So think about that a moment, and I'll try to walk through a short list that I have written down here. All right. So Who owns the cab? Happy Cab owns it. It's not Stephen Hemmerling's. That's one fact that will help us reach the conclusion that Hemmerling is an employee. All right. Take a look at the kinds of regulation that Happy Cab has implemented and that Hemmerling has to follow. Hemmerling has rules regarding use of the cab, the hours he can work, and how he can obtain a fare. So he doesn't have a lot of control over his own working conditions. Again, fact that lends itself to concluding that Hemmerling is an employee. Right? There is one fact here that maybe tries to indicate that Hemmerling is an independent contractor. All right? And what fact is that? That fact is that Happy Cab does not withhold taxes from his paycheck. All right? There's no withholdings. And I think if you look at the working situation as a whole, however, all right, there is a basis to say that Hemmerling is an employee. He has very little control, like we were talking about earlier. He doesn't own that cab. And so consequently, all right, if he is found to be an employee, all right, Happy Cab is going to take responsibility or going to be forced to take responsibility for his injuries. All right. Now, what is the reason, though, that Happy Cab doesn't want to withhold the taxes? It's extra work. All right. They would prefer not to have to be bothered to submit the payroll taxes to the IRS and to keep records of that. That's one reason why they have set this up like this, so that Hemmerling has to take responsibility on his own. All right. And they don't want to pay for his benefits, such as the workers' comp. So it's just a way for them to escape that extra responsibility. All right. But given the fact that Mr. Hemmerling doesn't have much control over his working conditions, he looks a lot like an employee, and a court would likely find him as such, and he should have been covered by workers' comp here. Oops, sorry, class, about that. I was trying to go back to the PowerPoint. All right, so this brings us to the end of this first part. In the next part, I'll start looking at the formation of the agency relationship.